Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take history's most formidable figures and, well, we cut straight through the noise to find the astonishing truth. Today, we are strapping in for a journey that's 8 centuries long. It spans continents and crowns. We're diving deep into the life of a woman who was really the hinge point of the entire 12th century. We are talking about Eleanor of Aquitaine.
She's an immense figure. And her story is so often, it's just buried under layers and layers of dramatic legend. You're talking about an heiress who married 2 kings, was a queen of France and then a queen of England, mothered 3 kings, and presided over an empire that stretched from Scotland all the way down to the Pyrenees.
So our mission today is to cut through all of that myth.
Exactly. We're relying on the best modern scholarship, people like Alison Weir, to really get at the political and cultural context that shaped her.
The big challenge, of course, is the source material itself. We're in the high Middle Ages here. We don't have her memoirs. We don't have diaries or, a stack of personal letters.
Not at all. What we have are chronicles. And let's be honest, they're often biased. They're frequently credulous, and they're driven by political agendas or just, frankly, deep-seated misogyny.
Right.
But, and this is the key thing, the little nuggets of genuine detail that do survive, they are extraordinary. We're talking legal codes, records of her political moves, and this sheer emotional power of her final letters.
And that's what lets us get past that simple, lurid image of the scandalous queen.
Precisely. It lets us build a much clearer portrait of her incredible intelligence and, honestly, her sheer political will.
So that is our core question for you, the listener, today. Was Eleanor of Aquitaine just this magnet for drama and scandal, beautiful but reckless? Or was she in reality this sophisticated, brilliant power broker whose influence really defined the entire geopolitical landscape of 12th century Europe?
And just a quick note on the names, because it gets confusing. We use the familiar English Eleanor for Eleanor. And to keep the family tree straight, Henry's son Richard's betrothed will be Alice, John's will be Alice, Louis VII's daughter, Marguerite. Just, it helps to keep everyone straight in a family where they all seem to share the same 2 or 3 names.
Okay, so to understand the woman who would become queen of 2 great kingdoms, we absolutely have to start where she started. In the region that defined her, Aquitaine.
In Poitou, her ancestral domain. And it was completely unlike the feudal north.
How so?
Well, for one, it was staggeringly wealthy. You cannot overstate the economic power of Aquitaine. It was richer than the entire royal domain of the King of France himself.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Chroniclers from the time, they used language that was almost ecstatic when they tried to describe it. One called it opulent Aquitaine, sweet as nectar, just overflowing with vineyards, forests, fruit, pasture land. Another said it just abounded with riches of many kinds.
And this wealth, it wasn't just on paper, right? It was physically expressed in the culture, in the architecture. What did her world actually look and feel like?
It was highly civilized for the era. Talking about small, white-walled cities, fortified keeps, and these magnificent Romanesque cathedrals in places like Poitiers. The architecture had these incredibly elegant archways. But what really sets it apart and kind of hints at the region's character are the sculptures.
What about them?
They were often described as these lively but grotesque sculptures of monsters. There was this deep artistic freedom, a touch of the irreverent, even in their religious art.
So you have opulence, you have high culture, but also, it seems, a lot of political volatility. The Dukes of Aquitaine always seem to be struggling with their own nobles.
They struggled mightily. The Aquitanian nobility were known as the turbulent lords. Now, the rougher northern chroniclers, they described them as elegant shaved faces, long hair, and they dismissed them as soft and idle. But that was a fatal mistake. When you provoked them, they were fiercely independent and violent. So Eleanor inherited a land that was rich, but politically fractured. Her vassals' loyalty was always conditional.
And this same environment created a legal and social status for women that was just totally different from the rest of feudal Europe.
This is absolutely crucial to understanding Eleanor. Aquitanian law, which was older than the church's total control over social life, was uniquely favorable to women. They could inherit property and rule on their own. They weren't just automatically handed over to a male guardian like they were in Normandy or England.
Which means they were active in public life, not hidden away.
Exactly. And that, in turn, fed the entire cultural movement of the region, the age of the troubadours and courtly love.
Ugh, courtly love. It's probably the most famous and maybe most misunderstood export from Aquitaine. This wasn't just romantic poetry, was it? The sources say it was more like an intellectual game.
It was a very elaborate set of rules.
Oh.
You had a worshipping suitor, usually a knight, who had to prove his unwavering loyalty and devotion over a long time. But the key, the revolutionary part, was the lady's position. She had the absolute upper hand. She set the pace. Her word was law, and the suitor had to prove himself worthy to her.
So it was this kind of controlled, erotic tension.
Yes, exactly. This idea that persistence might eventually be rewarded. And this was just in breathtaking contrast to the repressive transactional nature of feudal marriage, which was all about land and heirs, not personal devotion.
It sounds like a sophisticated kind of role-playing that gave women intellectual power, even if they didn't have direct political power.
It was intellectual power, and Eleanor was raised soaking in it. Her upbringing was exceptionally progressive for the time. She had a formal education, which was a huge rarity. She was taught to read in her own language, had instruction in Latin. She was also, an energetic and consummate sportswoman, loved talking, loved writing. And she developed this intense taste for luxury and refinement that she would later try to impose on two very different royal courts.
She definitely inherited that vitality and maybe some of that defiance from her notorious grandfather. We can't move on without talking about William IX.
William IX, Duke of Aquitaine, the original celebrity bad boy of the Middle Ages. He really set the stage for Eleanor's own notoriety. He was intelligent, gifted, a genuine poet, but he also had this insatiable thirst for sensual passion and adventure. He was constantly flouting the church with his erotic, sometimes blasphemous verses.
The stories about him are just, the sheer audacity is what brings him to life.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't subtle. For instance, he openly boasted that he was going to found an abbey for prostitutes near his castle. That's just a direct thumb in the eye of the establishment.
Oh.
Even more famously, when a bishop tried to excommunicate him in his own cathedral, William charged in with a drawn sword and grabbed the prelate by the neck.
And the bishop just stood his ground.
He did. He said, "Strike, strike, for I want to go to paradise," which kind of took the wind out of William's sails.
So what did William do?
He backed off with his legendary sneer. He said, "I do not love you enough to send you to paradise."
Ah.
And that anecdote, it just perfectly captures the volatile, sophisticated, and utterly defiant heritage that Eleanor brought with her to the French court.
So in 1137, at about 15 years old, Eleanor becomes the greatest heiress in Europe. An irresistible match. She marries Louis VII, becomes Queen of France, and brings her lands, her beauty, and this undeniable reputation with her.
It was a monumental political alliance for the French crown. But the personalities involved, they were just fundamentally doomed. Louis VII was never meant to be king. He was the second son, destined for the church. His older brother, Philip, was a notoriously arrogant kid until he was killed in 1131.
And this is the famous story of the runaway pig.
It is, yes. His horse shied at a pig in the street, threw him, and that was that. A runaway pig literally changes the course of European history.
It sounds like a parable.
It does, but it's true. So Louis inherits the throne, but not the temperament for it. Physically, he was imposing, tall, muscular, but spiritually, he was devoutly pious. He had a sensitive conscience, a childlike air of simplicity. He dressed like a clerk, hated ceremony. And it was this lack of passion that led to Eleanor's immortal complaint.
That she had married a monk, not a king.
Exactly.
This clash of cultures must have been immediate. She's coming from this world of troubadours and intellectual freedom into the very pious Capetian court.
Oh, it was jarring. Now, Paris at the time was having its own renaissance. It was a huge intellectual center, rediscovering Aristotle, Plato. The schools there were the genesis of the first university. So intellectually, it was electric. But court life itself was structured entirely around Louis's piety and routine.
Which, for Eleanor, used to public life and setting the cultural tone, must have been just soul-crushing.
Absolutely stultifying. The expectation was that she'd be a decorative asset and, most importantly, a mother of heirs. Her days were just this routine cycle of prayers and sermons and trivia. She did manage one small, telling act of defiance. The chroniclers note that she dismissed a cantor in the royal chapel that she thought was untalented and replaced him with her own choice. It's a tiny detail, but it shows her asserting her own taste.
And then the political failures of the early marriage just made things worse, starting with a really amateur military campaign.
Louis's inexperience was on full display. In 1141, he tried to lay siege to Toulouse, part of Eleanor's clan. Well, he was so confident he forgot to bring enough siege engines.
You're kidding!
Not at all. He had to retreat in undignified haste. It was a humiliating failure that really cemented his reputation for poor judgment.
And from there, things spiraled into a huge crisis over Eleanor's sister, Petronilla. The Vermandois scandal.
Right. Petronilla had married a count who'd arranged an invalid annulment from his first wife. Louis, trying to be a strong king, backed them. This led to them all being excommunicated. Louis saw this as a direct attack on his authority, and, in a fit of rage, he declared war on Count Theobald of Champagne, who was protecting the first wife.
And this blunder leads directly to the defining tragedy of Louis's life, the Vitry incident.
This was the moment that truly broke him. As his troops were overrunning Champagne, they came to the town of Vitry. The inhabitants, men, women, children, over 1,000 non-combatants, took refuge in the local church. They thought it was sacred ground. But Louis's troops set the town on fire, and the church burned to the ground, killing everyone inside.
1,000 people in a church. The horror of that must have been just immense.
It was. It shattered Louis. The scale of the civilian loss just deeply scarred his conscience. It replaced his youthful simplicity with this profound, almost desperate need for penance.
And that spiritual crisis gave Eleanor her first big opportunity to exert some real political influence.
It did, with the help of the most imposing spiritual figure in Europe, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard stepped in to force a peace. Eleanor saw her chance and met with him privately. She had a deal. She needed his help getting the excommunication on her sister lifted. In return, she would persuade Louis to make peace with Theobald.
And Bernard agreed.
He did. And he offered Louis the one thing he craved more than anything. He promised, "If you will do this, I in my turn promise to entreat the merciful Lord to grant you offspring." It was a path to both absolution and the male heir he so desperately wanted.
Louis's need for penance, plus the fall of Edessa in the Holy Land, meant the Second Crusade was pretty much inevitable.
Right. Louis announced his intention to take the cross on Christmas Day, 1146. His motivation was purely spiritual. He needed to atone. Eleanor's motivation, on the other hand, was entirely pragmatic and personal.
It was an escape.
The perfect escape from the boring routine of the French court. A chance for adventure and a chance to visit her favorite uncle, Raymond of Poitiers, who was the Prince of Antioch.
And this is where we get the spectacular Amazon legend, the story that she and her ladies dressed up as warriors.
It's a striking image, isn't it? Whether it's literally true or not, it shows how people saw her. The story goes they dressed in white tunics, red crosses, brandishing swords, and they galloped through the crowds, tossing spindles at men who refused to join, basically shaming them.
That's a powerful propaganda move.
It is. A Greek observer at the time did say they were dressed as Amazons, and he was so struck by her opulence, he nicknamed her Chrysoppus, or Golden Foot, probably from the gold embroidery on her robes. She was definitely making a statement.
The journey itself, though, was a disaster from the start, thanks to the German army marching ahead of them.
Utterly undisciplined. The Germans looted, burned, and murdered their way through Greece, creating so much hostility that the locals started killing their stragglers. Then you had the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel Comnenus, who had secretly made a truce with the very Turks the Crusaders were supposed to be fighting.
So outright treachery.
Yes, and the contrast between the rough Westerners and the sophisticated Byzantine court was staggering. Louis and Eleanor were brought to this opulent palace with marble floors, purple and gold everywhere, and banquets where they used forks, an implement totally unknown in the West.
But underneath all that sophistication was just malice, which led to the disaster at Mount Katniss.
A monumental catastrophe. Manuel's guides led the Germans into a deadly ambush. The French followed, and in a Turkish ambush, 7,000 Crusaders were killed. Louis himself barely escaped. His horse was killed, his guards slain, and he had to physically scramble up a sheer rock face, grabbing onto tree roots to hold off the attackers. He was just stupefied with grief.
So after surviving all that, they finally reach Antioch, and the whole disaster shifts from military to marital, centered on her uncle, Raymond.
Raymond of Poitiers. He was everything Louis was not. Chroniclers describe him as magnificent, tall, handsome, illiterate, yes, but charming, strong. He could reportedly bend an iron bar with his bare hands, and a decisive military pragmatist.
Which instantly created friction with Louis.
Oh, Louis was deeply unsettled by the close relationship between Eleanor and her uncle. He feared their political intimacy, and yes, most chroniclers imply a sexual involvement, though there's no direct proof. Eleanor, for her part, was just done with Louis. She was already looking for an annulment.
And Louis put a stop to it by basically dragging her out of Antioch.
He did, forcibly. After the crusade failed, they headed back to Europe, and Pope Eugenius III intervened one last time. He felt sorry for Louis and basically forced them to share a bed to try and get them to reconcile and, produce a male heir.
It worked briefly. She did get pregnant.
She did, but she suffered a miscarriage. And then later she bore a second daughter, Marguerite. The lack of a male heir was the political nail in the coffin for that marriage.
So despite the Pope's best efforts, the marriage was over. No son. In March 1152, they finally got the annulment.
The lack of a male heir was the real reason. The legal pretext, though, was consanguinity. They were fourth cousins. So the Council of Beaugency dissolved the marriage. Rumors of adultery spread later, but the actual legal record only mentions kinship. It was politically expedient.
And this is where the cynicism of the age really shines through.
It's pure political theater. Because what does she do? Within weeks, she marries Louis's archrival, Henry of Anjou. And here's the kicker. Henry was exactly as closely related to her as Louis was.
So the consanguinity excuse just vanished?
The moment it became inconvenient, this was a magnificent act of defiance and strategic revenge.
But as the richest unattached woman in Europe, she was immediately in incredible danger. The sources read like a thriller.
She was a huge target. She was almost seized twice on her way to Poitiers. First by Count Theobald V. She was warned and fled in the dark on a barge. The second time was even more dramatic. Henry of Anjou's own younger brother, Geoffrey, lay in wait to abduct her. Again, she was warned and had to evade him, traveling by another way to Poitiers.
It's clear she couldn't afford to stay single for long. She summoned Henry of Anjou and they married in secret in May 1152.
The speed and secrecy were astonishing. Henry was 29 years younger than her, and he already controlled Anjou, Maine, and Normandy. Combined with her Aquitaine, they created an empire overnight. Louis was in a disastrous position.
Now, Henry II Plantagenet was a force of nature, but the sources also suggest this dark, volatile side to his family, starting with the legend of the diabolical ancestress.
The Plantagenets had this dark folklore about them, the legend of Melusine, this diabolical ancestress who would fly shrieking out of a church during Mass. Bernard of Clairvaux, the Saint Bernard, took one look at young Henry and delivered this grim prophecy: from the devil they came, and to the devil they will return.
And Henry himself was known for his spectacular temper.
Spectacular is the word. When he was enraged, he would literally throw himself on the ground, roll around yelling, and grind his teeth on the rushes covering the floor. It was a terrifying physical explosion of energy. Peter of Blois said he never sits except when eating or riding. He was perpetual motion.
And this man, who finished his dinner in 5 minutes, must have had a strong reaction when Eleanor's world of courtly love followed her to his court, specifically in the form of the troubadour Bernard de Ventador.
Bernard became her patron. He wrote these exquisite poems about her beauty and charm, calling her his magnet. Henry, this restless pragmatist, was completely unfamiliar with the stylized game of courtly love. He just found it alarming.
Especially given her reputation.
Exactly. He was acutely aware of the rumors, some of which he might have encouraged, that Eleanor had previously had an affair with his own father, Geoffrey of Anjou. He wanted absolutely no hint of scandal, so he took swift, diplomatic action. He quietly removed Bernard from court before they sailed for England. Politics, for Eleanor, had clearly superseded courtly games.
So Henry becomes King of England in 1154. Establishing this colossal Angevin empire. And his first big act is to bring order to England after the chaos of King Stephen's reign, the anarchy.
And he ruthlessly capitalized on the country's desperation for stability. His rule brought in these foundational legal reforms that define English governance even today. He divided the country into legal circuits, sent his justices out, and crucially, he gradually replaced trial by ordeal.
Where you prove your innocence by, what, holding a hot iron?
Exactly. He replaced that with trial by jury. It was a staggering shift that laid the bedrock for common law. And to manage this huge bilingual empire, he created this sophisticated mobile bureaucracy.
So how did he actually run this government on the move?
Well, you had the justiciar, who was basically the chief minister. He had the exchequer, managing finances. And the chancery, the royal secretariat, headed by the chancellor, who was always a clergyman, issuing all the vital writs in the king's name.
But this all had to follow Henry, who was pathologically in constant motion.
It was organized chaos. He was forever on his travels, covering what one observer called unbearable distances like a courier. And when he moved, the entire government, documents, coins, seals, came with him. His household alone was about 200 people.
What was that court life like? I can't imagine it was the refined atmosphere Eleanor was used to.
Far from it. Henry's court was all speed, chaos, and vulgarity. John of Salisbury called it a licentious hotbed of scandal, filled with actors, jugglers, buffoons, and even a host of whores and pimps. The food was often appalling, partly because Henry ate so fast dinner in 5 minutes that quality was irrelevant.
And there's that great anecdote about the monks.
A classic. The monks of St. Swithin complained to him, weeping, that their bishop only allowed them 10 courses at meals. Henry, completely unimpressed, just snapped back. In my court, I am satisfied with 3. Perish your bishop if he doesn't cut your dishes down to the same. He valued function over any kind of pomp, which must have grated on Eleanor.
And during all this, they have 8 children. Richard, born in 1157, seems to have been her favorite from the start.
He was quickly identified with a Merlin prophecy. The eagle of the broken covenant shall rejoice in her 3rd nesting. Eleanor was the eagle, the broken covenant, her divorce, and Richard was the 3rd son who'd bring her glory. And she initially had a key political role, acting as co-regent, governing Anjou and Maine for Henry.
But the empire got too big for one man, which led to the Treaty of Montmirail and the partition among the sons.
Right, in 1169. Henry wanted to ensure effective governance. So young Henry got England, Normandy, and Anjou. Geoffrey got Brittany. But crucially, and this was almost certainly Eleanor's influence, Richard was designated heir to Aquitaine. Her favorite son got her ancestral lands.
Before that family dynamic could explode, though, Henry had his own massive political crisis. The conflict with Thomas Becket.
A monumental conflict. Henry had made Becket his close friend, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Henry's goal was simple. He wanted to end the benefit of clergy.
Okay, let's unpack that for the listener because it was a huge flashpoint.
Sure. Essentially, it meant that any man in holy orders, even a minor clerk, could only be tried for crimes in a church court. And those courts were notoriously lenient. So a man could commit murder, claim clerical status, and escape the king's justice. Henry wanted all criminals tried in his royal courts.
And Becket, his former friend, refused.
He suddenly became this devout opponent, refusing to submit, saving the honor of God. This led to years of conflict, Becket's flight to the continent, and ultimately Henry's infamous, impulsive cry that led 4 knights to murder Becket in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. And that assassination just fundamentally undermined Henry's moral authority.
The family tension finally exploded just after Becket's murder in the fatal revolt of 1173. Young Henry, despite being a crowned king, was simmering.
He was extraordinarily handsome, but politically powerless. He was being told that his father's reign had symbolically ended when he was crowned, and he resented that his brothers had actual domains while he just had empty titles.
And Eleanor, furious over Henry's constant infidelities, was the prime mover behind the conspiracy.
The chroniclers are surprisingly unified on this. She saw her chance to undermine Henry and likely approached her ex-husband, Louis VII, for aid. Henry was actually warned. Raymond of Toulouse sent him a message. I advise you, King, to beware of your wife and sons.
And he dismissed it. A fatal mistake.
He called it unthinkable perfidy. But Eleanor was already on the move, trying to escape to Paris. She was ambushed and captured near Lusignan, possibly disguised as a man, and delivered straight to Henry. The rebellion was crushed, and Eleanor spent the next 15 years in captivity.
Imprisonment sounds terrifying, but the sources say it was more of a luxurious house arrest.
Right. She was held mostly at Winchester. She lived, as one chronicler said, no worse than her palace, with her retinue and fine food. But she was completely isolated from the outside world. Meanwhile, Henry performed his huge public penance for Becket's murder, walking barefoot to Canterbury and allowing monks to scourge him. It was essential to get his prestige back.
And once the revolt was over, Richard was sent to pacify Aquitaine. The descriptions of his methods are just savagely brutal.
It's a stark contrast, isn't it? Richard's reputation as a warrior was built on this campaign. He ravaged the countryside. Chroniclers recorded that his opponents had their eyes gouged out, their hands cut off, and their women raped by his men. This was Angevin control through pure terror.
And you have to wonder how Eleanor reconciled her love for the refined culture of Aquitaine with her favorite son's absolute savagery.
That's the essential paradox of her life. She was a product of Aquitaine's intellectual world, but she understood that survival in a feudal military society required Henry's and later Richard's unapologetic ruthlessness. Dynastic survival came first.
Henry II finally died in 1189. Eleanor was immediately released. And now, in her late 60s, she re-emerges as the stabilizing force of the empire.
She was indispensable. Richard was the heir, but he was a stranger to England. So Eleanor toured the country with immense energy, getting new oaths of fealty, securing his position before he left for the Third Crusade.
But the defining tragedy of her final years comes in 1192 when Richard is captured in Germany.
Right. Captured by Leopold of Austria, sold to the Emperor Henry VI, who demanded this extortionate ransom. 100,000 silver marks. That's twice England's annual revenue. It was an impossible demand. And Eleanor, now in her 70s, takes charge of raising the money and appealing for her son's life through this remarkable series of documents, her letters to the Pope.
These letters are just raw with fury and politically charged demands. What does she say to the Pope?
They are magnificent, probably written by her secretary, but it's her voice. She writes with this dramatic personal lament. Why have I, the Lady of Two Kingdoms, the mother of two kings, reached the ignominy of this abominable old age? She mourns her dead sons, she curses her living ones, Richard imprisoned, and John actively trying to usurp the throne.
And she doesn't just lament, she goes on the attack.
She levels this scorching attack directly at the Pope for doing nothing. She calls him a mercenary. She demands he draw the sword of Peter, reminding him that spiritual authority is higher than imperial authority. Her language is shocking. Restore my son to me then, O man of God, if indeed you are a man of God and not a man of mere blood. And the threat is clear. For know that if you are slow in releasing my son, from your hand will the Most High require his blood.
That is the voice of a woman who absolutely refuses to accept the limits of her power, even when she's seemingly helpless.
It's an absolute refusal to be silenced. The ransom was eventually raised, and Philip of France, who had been trying to keep Richard locked up, got a warning.
The famous warning sent to Richard's treacherous brother, John.
To John, yes, who had fled to Philip. The message was stark. Look to yourself. The devil is loosed. Richard's return in 1194 was triumphant. Eleanor rode by his side, attended his second coronation. Soon after, they sailed for Normandy, and neither of them would ever set foot in England again.
After securing Richard's position, Eleanor, now in her 70s and even 80s, remains politically essential.
She has astonishing stamina. Her final major act was in 1200, after Richard's death. She secured the marriage alliance between her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, and the son of her old enemy, Philip II of France.
So this wasn't just a truce, it was her ultimate dynastic endgame.
It was. That marriage ensured that Eleanor's bloodline would eventually wear the crown of France through her grandson, Louis IX, who became a saint. Even in her final years, she's planning the political future of Europe.
And around 1202, aged about 80, she finally retires.
She took the veil at the monastery at Fontevraud. It had been founded near her family's land and was, fittingly, dedicated to enhancing the prestige and rights of women, with everyone living under the rule of an abbess.
She died in 1204 and was buried there among her dynasty.
Right, in the crypt, between Henry II and Richard I. Her effigy, her gisant, is one of the most unique from that period. It's painted stone, she's wearing a crown, there's a hint of a smile, and significantly, she's holding a book of devotions, portrayed as both queen and scholar.
It's just a tragedy that such a magnificent resting place was later destroyed.
During the French Revolution, the abbey was ransacked, the tombs were vandalized, and the bones were scattered. A final historical indignity.
And even in death, she couldn't escape the sensationalism that plagued her life, the myths that cemented her reputation as the Devil Queen.
The most famous and completely false myth is the Rosamund legend, the story that she murdered Henry's mistress, Rosamund de Clifford. Later versions have Eleanor following a thread through a labyrinth to find her secret bower and then forcing her to bleed to death in a hot bath.
It's a great story, but totally untrue. Why did it become so popular?
Because their marriage was so notoriously contentious, the public and the chroniclers needed a dramatic, lurid explanation for it. The Rosamund legend provided that dark drama, and it just reinforced the Devil Queen narrative that started with the Milesian ancestry. Chroniclers kept amplifying it, comparing her to the Roman Empress Messalina, even claiming she'd intended to elope with Saladin. These fictions just completely overshadowed her political genius for centuries.
Okay, so let's unpack this one last time for the listener. We've seen the sophisticated culture she came from, the trauma of the Crusades, the founding of this massive empire, her fury and imprisonment, and her powerful reemergence as the regent who saved her son's inheritance.
She was absolutely not a pawn. Richard of Devizes called her an incomparable woman who excelled in political qualities rarely to be met with in a woman. She had astonishing longevity, political stamina. She proves that will and strategic marriages were tools women could use to overcome the limits of feudal society.
What stands out most for me is that sheer, brutal contrast she managed to bridge. She fostered this high culture of courtly love and music, yet she operated in a military society where her own favorite son used savage reprisals, gouging out eyes to maintain order. She navigated both refinement and ruthless necessity.
That is the ultimate synthesis of her character. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the truest picture of her core essence is in those furious letters she wrote when Richard was a prisoner. She's old, she's confined, she's seemingly powerless, and yet she looks at the Pope himself and demands he act, cursing him as a mercenary and threatening him with divine retribution.
So if that dramatic, angry demand is the truest surviving picture of her character, what does it ultimately tell you, the learner, about the real measure of power that women held, even when they were literally in chains?
The real aha moment is recognizing that Eleanor's power was never just confined to her palace or her title. It was rooted in her intellect and her indomitable will. Even imprisoned and aged, Eleanor refused to be a spectator. She refused to be silent, ensuring that her voice and her dynastic line would endure long after her captors, and the myths they created were nothing but dust.